Begin. Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com, joined for the first time by Ryan from Fight Linker. Welcome, Ryan. Glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
Ryan's calling in all the way from Montreal, Canada. That's in a foreign country to those of you real Americans across the border up north. We're going to be talking about UFC on Fuel 7, Barao versus McDonald. They're fighting for possibly the most coveted prize in athletic competition today, the UFC interim bantamweight title.
The runner-up belt.
That's right. This is the bonus, the B slice. This isn't even the biggest. This isn't even the second biggest belt in the 135-pound class for the UFC because Ronda Rousey is clearly a bigger star than Renan Barao.
Well, yeah, you might have some people who disagree with you there, but they're mostly sexist pigs.
Yep, and Brazilian. So we're just going to disavow their opinion. And neither of us has really done our homework on this, so we're going to be pretending like we're just regular fans. Which we are. That's why we do what we do. And we're just going to run through this card, and basically I'm going to ask two questions. Care, don't care, remember, don't remember. And we'll see which of us remembers these guys, which of us cares about these fights. And then the fights that we do care about and remember, we'll talk about in a little more detail. This card has an unbelievable 6 fights on Facebook. First up, what the fuck is up with that? 6 fights on Facebook? Who wants to look at their screen for wow, 25 minutes times 6? Yuck, or 15 minutes times 6. That's over an hour on Facebook.
Well, it kind of harkens back to the early days where that's how it always was. And I kind of dig it because being Canadian, we don't normally get a lot of the programming that ends up on Fuel, especially now that hockey's back. I don't know if you guys were aware, we're kind of big into that. So when the strike was on, it was great because they were filling up a lot of their empty time with Fuel content. Now, not so much. So I'm always happy when there's Facebook content because it means I have to break less laws and there's less likely to be an angry Dana White and FBI SWAT team busting into my house.
How are Canadian fans supposed to see the Fuel TV programming? What's the usual deal?
Well, we have our big sports networks are Sportsnet and what was the other one? The Score. And between the two of them, we normally get something, but they've all been expanding. And there's the Score 2 and there's Sportsnet East, West, Sportsnet 2, Sportsnet 3, and these are all on really weird cable packages. So for the most part, a lot of stuff's been ending up on Sportsnet 2 now, which nobody gets.
I see. It sounds like you're enjoying the same experience American fans have been enjoying all year with Fuel TV, the hard to find. I had to spend an extra $5 a month to get Fuel TV, and I was happy about that. But go ahead.
I'd be happy to pay $5 if I had an option to pay a couple of bucks to get everything conveniently. I would, but the way I look at it is there is always one place that you can go to get it, and that is the internet, and that is a free market mechanism that the UFC has to realize exists, and crying about it and whining about it isn't going to change it.
I agree. I think they're doing something. They did just cut a deal in the U.S. where Comcast is going to be allowing, I believe, on demand. So you'll have to pay, but just for the fights you want to see, which is a perfectly reasonable deal to me. I don't see any problem with paying a couple bucks to see a Fuel card. But anyway, let's turn to these 6 fights on Facebook. First up, we got flyweights Phil Harris versus Ulysses Gomez. First, do you remember these guys?
Well, I know Useless Gomez a little bit just because he's got a nifty nickname. This is really where nicknames come in handy. If you got something clever, it's going to stick in people's heads.
That's right. And Ulysses, or Useless Gomez, is a veteran of the flyweight circuit who kind of got smoked in his UFC debut by John Moraga, who's now fighting for the title. So Ulysses Gomez is one of these guys, just like Ucie da Silva, whose name I can't pronounce, who was ruling the roost in Tai Chi Palace and moved up to the UFC and already struggling. Phil Harris, my apologies, Phil. I got no effing idea who you are. Let me look at Wikipedia. He's already lost the UFC fight. Got submitted by Darren Oyinama. I think I remember that fight. Do you remember that one?
No, not really. But you don't hang off like the bottom of the prelims without really kind of holding on to your job with your fingernails. And at this point, you look at it like this. There's over 400 guys on the UFC roster. These are new guys in a flyweight division that isn't getting a lot of attention. I mean, most of these fights are ending up on the prelims. So, as far as being able to tell who these guys are, if you don't remember them, don't feel too bad.
So do you care about this fight? You looking forward to watching it, going to make the effort?
I think it's going to be good. Anytime you got two flyweights that are fighting for their jobs and they know it, I think they're going to go out there and be a little bit more active than maybe some guys who are going to be content to do a bit of hit and run, a bit of that technical counter striking. So I'm expecting it to be good at the very least. As far as like the actual fighters, do I expect them to be around in the next 2 years? Probably not.
Yeah, I'm with you. I can't even make a pick. I'll go with Useless just because I remember his name and I watched some of his Tai Chi Palace fights. But let's move on up to bantamweight, where Vaughn Lee, a Brit, is fighting Motonobu Tezuka, not a Brit. Remember these guys?
I absolutely do not.
I vaguely remember Vaughn Lee being British, and I vaguely remember Tanaka having a fight. Tanaka, by the way, is not from the British Isles. Excuse me, Tezuka. Seconds in, I'm already getting his name wrong. This is what we call professional blogging, Ryan. As you know, this is how we roll. So, Tezuka, Pancrase veteran, lost to Alex Caceres, a.a. Bruce Leroy. How do you say his last name?
Caceres.
Caceres. Bruce Leroy took a split decision from Tezuka, and the fight I thought he did all right in. And then Vaughn Lee's had some ups and downs, lost to TJ Dillashaw and Chris Carriazo, but has a submission win over Kid Yamamoto. So maybe once again,
yeah, but what does that mean nowadays?
Well,
I mean, maybe 5 years ago that would have begun to be impressive, but at this point.
Yeah, the aged Kid Yamamoto never really recovered from his attempt to make the Japanese wrestling team, and some injuries suffered there. So I'd say I don't really care. I mean, God bless these guys and wish them the best, but I really don't care about this fight. It could have some good action, but
Britain versus Japan.
Yep. Some vicious regional rivalries there, are actually as far away, but they both drive on the wrong side of the road, so. That's something. We could. All right, moving on up. We've got middleweights Tom Watson versus Stanislav Nedkov. Remember these guys?
I like Tom Watson. Tom Watson's okay. I have no problem with him.
I see. What about Nedkov?
I remember him vaguely, and if I remember him properly, he was a bit of a wrestler. So I don't know.
He has the most notable thing I remember about Nedkov is he was getting his ass beat by Luis Kane at the first Brazilian, the return, I guess the second Brazil UFC 134, and knocked Kane out with a pretty fluky punch at the end of a one-round ass beating, and then let's see. It says
I just remember that like years ago. Remember back in the day where we'd have regular Japanese shows and we'd stay up until like 7 or 8 a.m. watching them. Mm-hmm. I remember falling asleep during his fight with Kevin Randleman, which he won by split decision. And I think that really says everything that needs to be said. If you, in the year 2009, have a split decision win over Kevin Randleman, that kind of now to be fair to him, a lot of his other performances seem to have better. He's got a lot of submissions, a lot of TKOs, but I'm just putting it out there that does not bode well.
And what is it you like about Tom Watson? Because Watson is not a guy that I've especially been impressed with. He does have a KO win over Ninja Hua, Shogun's brother. I believe that might have been Ninja's retirement party. And then he's got a loss to Brad Tavares in the UFC. What do you like about Tom Watson?
Oh, back in the day, I used to watch I used to everything that I could get my hand on. I'm a little bit more discerning now as an older MMA fan, but I would watch Cage Rages and Bamas and stuff like that. And he was a regular on those. The people really got behind him, and you get swept up in that kind of enthusiasm for a fighter. And he was a big deal in that regional circuit, and he was always entertaining. So he was pretty reliable in that way. So I've always he's one of those guys. I've got a soft spot for British brawlers or warriors, and for the Canadians who also fall into that. I'm no longer loyal to every Canadian, but the guys that really put it down on the line, I appreciate.
Well, I can't argue.
Go to the Commonwealth.
So you got a pick in this one? I'm picking Nedkov to wrestle hug him.
Yeah, I agree. He comes from the era where British can't wrestle, and so the idea of Nedkov not going straight to that and just putting a very soft ground and pounding on him are
a gentle lull and caressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. So up next we got featherweights Andy Ogle and Josh Grisby. And I have to say, Wikipedia used to put little flags next to the fighters, and I've really missed that. They stopped doing that, and I got to say, more bullshit from Wikipedia, who are actively fucking up their MMA coverage.
It's specifically two guys. I've been involved in this fight for this has been going on over the last year and a half. There are two editors, MT King and Haster, who are messing up the entire MMA Wikipedia experience. Unfortunately, they get bored very quickly. So I'm expecting them to fuck off in the next 4 or 5 months, and we'll get everything back. Singular pages for all of our events, flags next to our fighters, and they'll get rid of the new way that they're formatting everything.
Any insight on these two assholes? Like, are they big editors in, I don't know, British romantic fiction or something? How do they have the power to do this?
Basically, you've got super editors. Like there's a couple of different levels of Wikipedia editors. You got your general contributors and users, and then you've got your super editors who have a history of basically shepherding topics along. And once you become a super editor, you have kind of extra powers. You're able to go into discussion groups with other super editors. And these guys got there. One of them is a World of Warcraft, like he's just as hardcore as us about World of Warcraft, or about, it's just as we are about MMA. So
are you fucking kidding me? So
nerdy.
A nerd who spends all his time wikiing about World of Warcraft thinks that MMA doesn't merit Wikipedia coverage. I was thinking these assholes were like, writing about Emily Bronte or something, or I don't know.
Oh, we wish, and they consider our entire sport to be cruft, like not legitimate enough to deserve any pages whatsoever on Wikipedia, and they push everything towards that and ignore all reasoning. And until we find our own super editor with enough time to combat them, we're pretty much up shit creek.
That could be a Kickstarter campaign. Pay some loser to become the Wikipedia king of MMA. And anyway, let's get back to this fight. It's so compelling, we've already forgotten to talk about it. Andy Ogle versus Josh Grisby, featherweights. You remember these guys?
Well, it wasn't Andy Ogle. I remember Andy Ogle being a very unimpressive UK fighter. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, he was on The Ultimate Fighter, and it was during that dark. I think you can now say that there was a dark ages for The Ultimate Fighter somewhere between, I don't know, season 7 and up to the last live season.
That's pretty long. I would have to.
Well, so were the Dark Ages.
I'd say that season 10 was a brief reign, maybe Charlemagne's reign of the Dark Ages there, because you got Kimbo, Matt Mitrione, Roy Nelson, the best ratings in the
golden
series
age.
Histories. Yes.
The golden age. Oh, that was great.
Yeah. So Ogle lost to Akira Kurosani by split decision. And now he's fighting Josh Grisby. What about Josh Grisby? You remember anything about this kid?
I love Grisby. I don't know what happened to him. He used to, like, when he during the WEC days, he was great, and I was expecting lots of good things. Like, he used to be up there in title talk.
Yeah, he was 14-1 at one point. Submitted L.C. Davis. Submitted Jens Pulver. Not that means much. Knocked out Micah Miller, and people were talking hot shit. Then comes to the UFC, loses 3 in a row.
Yeah, and I can understand Dustin Poirier losing to him. George Roop not so much, and Randy Yaya. Yaya is a guy who's interesting. He's another guy that I used to like. If he comes in and he uses his jiu-jitsu Demian Maia style, he's a beast and no one can stop him. But he very rarely does, and he just seems to be he's one of those inconsistent guys who's either great or terrible.
Yep, and he's limited there. So you got a pick here. You think Grisby's going to get on the comeback trail against?
I'm picking Grisby just because I like him, and Andy Ogle's one of those guys who seems like he's in on that affirmative action bandwagon. Like, you need UK fighters in, and Ogle's already there. So fingers crossed for Grisby. He needs a comeback.
Yep, can't argue with there. My guess is that the young Mr. Grisby has probably developed other interests than training in the gym. As the sort of thing that men in their early 20s are wont to do, and something's happened, because he showed a lot of promise, and then he just, ever since that Poirier fight, just has not been impressive at all. Up next, we've got lightweights Paul Sass, the armbar king, versus Danny Castillo. I might have tipped my hand. Do you remember these guys?
Paul Sass is the triangle king, the Sass angle.
Right. Yeah,
I am in love with him. I love any jiu-jitsu guy. I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, not in a I do jiu-jitsu. I thought I wanted to do jiu-jitsu, but it turns out jiu-jitsu hates me.
Hates me too.
But I love it. I love watching it. I love guys who go out and trust in the power of jiu-jitsu. It's very much like the Force, and it's do or do not. There is no try, and Sass goes out and does. And just because he got caught by Matt Wyman in his last fight, a lot of people are saying that's his ceiling. But Wyman's another one of those guys who, sometimes he's good and sometimes he's fucking amazing. And he was amazing when he fought Paul Sass.
Yeah, that was a great fight. That was a really good grappling battle. That was, I believe, on the UFC on Fuel TV, Struve versus Miocic. And Wyman really tooled Sass. I mean, he fought him on the ground, went right into his strength, and countered him with a beautiful armbar and got the tap. But I don't know. Sass is up against a pretty tough wrestler in Danny Castillo. Castillo, he's got wins over Anthony Njoku, Shamar Bailey, sorry, Shalimar, that's bad. Beat Joe Stevenson. Has a win over Dustin Poirier. Forgot about that. So Castillo, I got to go with Castillo in this one, but I think Sass has a live chance to triangle him.
Well, I think it really depends on how it goes. Like, if Castillo goes to his wrestling, then he's going to be in trouble. But what happens so many times when you have a really good wrestler against a guy who's great with submissions is he uses his wrestling to stand up, and you end up with 3 rounds of bad kickboxing. So if we get the bad kickboxing, then probably Castillo. If it goes to the ground, then I like Sass.
Yeah, I can't argue with you there. And so final fight on the Facebook card, we've got Terry Edom and Rene Forte. You remember these guys?
Well, who can forget Terry Edom of the greatest highlight since Sean Salmon got absolutely destroyed. So Terry Edom will live on forever in UFC highlights until, like, when aliens come down to Earth a million years from now and look up the sport. Terry Edom will be right up there at the top because he got so amazingly knocked out.
Yeah, he ate a wheel kick from Edson Barbosa that was just a thing of beauty, and really, that's overshadowed his whole career. But he's a tough fighter. He's 15-4. He's got several wins in the UFC. Let's tally him up. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wins in the UFC and 4 losses. So he's established himself as kind of a middle of the pack guy. Looks like
he's been hanging around since the beginning of the UFC's UK expansion, and he's not bad, he's not great, flashes of brilliance, but generally, the main thing is, I don't know what Rene Forte brings to the game. He's a tough Brazil veteran who did not win. So, but I don't. In normal seasons, if you're a tough washout, then I don't give you much credit. But Tough Brazil was actually a decent field, so who knows? Like, he could be a sleeper. Like, getting knocked out of Tough Brazil doesn't mean immediately that you're no good. So,
very good point. Very good point. So, do you care or not care about this fight?
I kind of care because I have this feeling, and it might be wrong, but there are times where Joe Silva puts a fight together where he's like, I'm going to feature this dude. And this dude is going to impress everybody. And the fact that he is up at the top of the Facebook prelims makes me think that this might be one of those fights.
Yep. Could be a big chance for Edom. So we got 6 fights on the preliminary card. Let me run through, see if we tally up the care or don't care. We kind of cared about the flyweight fight. We didn't care with Useless Gomez versus Phil Harris. We didn't care about Von Lee versus Motonobu Tezuka. Did you care about Tom Watson versus Nedkov?
I think it's going to be a terrible fight.
Okay, so that's a don't care. So we've got 2 don't cares for that one. Andy Ogle and Grisby, you kind of cared?
I like that. I'm cheering for Grisby, and if I got a horse in the race, then I'm always excited.
All right, Sass and Castillo.
I love Sass.
So you care. And Terry Edom versus Rene Forte, kind of care.
We'll see. Yeah, if that turns out to be something good, I'll claim that I knew all along.
So this Facebook card is teetering on the knife's edge, just as Gandalf would tell Frodo that Ryan Harkness almost cares about more of the fights than he doesn't care about. And that
was the geekiest thing ever.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm right up there with him on the knife edge. The only thing that's going to make me care less about these things is it's going to be early in the afternoon, and I really won't have had much of a chance to get blitzed before these fights started. Not that I do that sort of thing, but if I did, I wouldn't have much time to do it. So
I really enjoy these afternoon cards. Like, I'm jealous of Australian fans because every pay-per-view is an afternoon card, and I imagine, a beautiful sunny day, an outside patio, you got your television, you got your Barbie, you got your beers. I mean, what could be better? So I really enjoy the idea of net. If I actually had friends around my area who gave a damn about fighting to the point that they'd watch a fuel card, I would have them over to do that. So as it stands, I'm going to get a pizza, sit on the couch, and enjoy the fact that I don't have to stay up till 1 a.m. to enjoy the fights.
That is a plus. That is a plus. How is your social circle? My UFC thing is tapered off, but I get more people coming to the big events than I had, say, in 2011 this year, it seems like. But it's definitely down from 2009.
It's still people. Montreal has a reputation for being a big fight city, and it has a lot of infrastructure. It's got a lot of gyms, and I'm sure there are certain social circles where it's bopping, but for the most part, it's a hockey town, and any normal people, quote unquote, that you talk to will still look at you when you explain to them that you blog about Ultimate Fighting, like you're a pro wrestling blogger, or that you're just weird. So there's not a lot of interest, for at least from the crowd that I hang out with. And for the bigger fights, sometimes I'll be able to pull together and get a bunch of people to come over. But even then, me and 4 or 5 of us will be watching the fights while everybody else, it's more of a social party. So.
Yep. I'm with you on that. All right, well, let's turn to the main card. We got another 6 fights on this one. Welterweight Shea Mills versus Matthew Riddle. You remember these guys?
Yeah, well, Matt Riddle is great. I love Matt Riddle because he's very quotable. He obviously smokes a lot of pot and it makes him kind of goofy. So for me, it makes my job easy. I just say, what did Matt Riddle say today? So
Cut and paste or transcribe. It is a beautiful thing for the MMA blogger. I got to agree. What about Shea Mills? Any feelings or memories with Mr. Mills?
Another UK guy that's just kind of there. I'm sure it's going to be a bit of a brawl. They usually put Matt Riddle in fights like that. It's starting off the card, so it's very transparent what they expect to happen in this fight, and I'm sure it will. But maybe this is just having watched the sport for so long, but a brawl is no longer a brawl. You go back and you watch even like Stephan Bonner versus Forrest Griffin 1, and it doesn't give you the same tingles that it does before because you've seen it. You've seen it time and time again. So when you see 2 guys of little consequence just banging it out to a decision because neither of them really has a reputation for really, being that knockout superstar. So I'm going to lean more towards the don't really care.
All right, I'm basically with you here. Shea Mills, all I really remember about Shea Mills is he fought Chris Cope, and Chris Cope dated some chick or something. And
Gina Carano?
Yes, Gina Carano, that's it. I knew that there, and so that stigma has sort of rubbed off on Shea Mills. And then Riddle, like you say, he's entertaining, but not that entertaining. And he's had his ups and his downs. I get him mixed up with some other sort of vaguely wrestler kid that was on top around the same time. So let's move on to light heavyweights James Te-Huna and Ryan Jimmo. Care? Don't care?
Ooh, don't care. Don't care.
Do you remember these guys?
Well, Ryan Jimmo, I believe, is the guy who does the robot from Canada.
You're correct. You're correct. His nickname is The Big Deal. And
he's just not that big of a deal. I have issues with guys who are around because they're tough and at light heavyweight who don't have a lot of finishing ability. And that basically describes. It basically. Well, I guess it doesn't really describe James Te-Huna.
He knocked out Anthony the Hippo Perosh in his UFC debut in 7 seconds.
Well, Anthony Perosh is another one of those affirmative action guys who's in because he's Australian. So
it's true. But still, that's something that Jimmo couldn't do in the MFC. I watched many at MFC on HDNet and saw Ryan Jimmo snoozing up the place with a lot of control fighting. So I was pleased that he at least knew how to go for the kill. And Te-Huna seems like your classic Maori warrior type. He had a good fight against Joey Beltran. But yeah, he knocked out Aaron Rose and Ricardo Romero. He's a tough kid. I think he might get a knockout. I think this might be a fun fight. I don't know that I care, but this is my sleeper pick for a vicious taste of violence.
I hope so. Just, I don't recall Te-Huna being all that consistent with, he's one of those guys that you just really wish would, for his reputation as a brawler, and, when you've got these native guys who, go in and they've got that, you really expect them to sling leather, and to a large degree, he never really lets go like you would want him to. So he'll sometimes, and when he does, he gets great results, so it just frustrates you even more.
I see. So James Te-Huna is a big tease. I can't argue. So let's move on up to welterweights. Iceland's dream man Gunnar Nelson, the sensation from the north, versus Jorge Santiago, or is it George Santiago? I never can tell with these Brazilians and their J's.
If you're Brazilian, the J is J, and if you're Mexican, it's a hey. So it is.
So it's George Santiago.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. So Santiago did big things outside the UFC. Won a Strikeforce tournament. Did some things in Sengoku. Some great fights there. So obviously, I remember these guys. You remember these guys?
Yeah, I mean, Santiago is one of those guys that really you're surprised that he doesn't do better based on some of his history. So he's one of those dudes who could really be like at the top of his division if a couple of bounces had gone his way. And I don't know whether or not, a lot of these guys who have jumped around to a lot of organizations, I feel like they have sport fatigue, where things have been tough for so long that when they finally get into the big league, they've given everything that they can give and they're emotionally spent. Maybe that's the case, but you can always rise up out of that all of a sudden. I mean, look at Vitor Belfort is a good example. There's a guy who's had more ups and downs than the biggest roller coaster in the world. So
Vitor's ups and downs tend to coincide with his PED use.
Yeah, that's
which is
actually
legal
pretty
now.
true.
Vitor's got permission, so good for Vitor. But yeah, Santiago, I mean, he had a great run in Sengoku, which is fairly meaningless, although he did put on 2 incredible wars with Kazuo Mizaki that I recommend to any fan. I've put those fights on in front of some pretty half-ass casual fans and had a room full of people cheering, and this was a fight on videotape, not even live. So I recommend those if you haven't seen him. But the knock on him in his first run in the UFC was that he didn't have a good chin, and Chris Lieben and Alan Belcher took advantage of that and knocked him right out of the UFC in back-to-back losses. Had a long undefeated run with one exception where he got knocked out from the top. Mohamed Khalidov was on the bottom and knocked out Santiago from his back. And then Brian Stan, when Santiago returned to the UFC, carrying a pretty big contract. And I think that kept his second run in the UFC pretty short. Stan knocked him the fuck out at UFC 130, and then Demian Maia beat him in a decision in a pretty lackluster fight in Houston at UFC 136. So he's won a couple of fights, one by knockout, one by submission in Titan FC. I think the thing with Santiago is he's got everything you need except a chin. I think he's got good submissions, he's got good striking. Just does not have a UFC caliber chin. Gunnar Nelson, though, I think is a tiny bit of a hype. He's young, he's 10-0. He choked out DeMarcus Johnson in his UFC debut in September. A few dorks that think Icelandic Jiu-Jitsu means anything were pretty pumped. But I'm still skeptical on Gunnar Nelson. I mean, I'm a big fan of Iceland. I love to read an Icelandic saga by the firelight. But I don't know. This Santiago's going to be a big test. You got a pick here?
Well, I like Nelson. I like the hype. And this is a textbook definition test. Like Santiago has established himself basically as a gatekeeper, tough, and if you don't come prepared or with your skills ready, he'll take you out. So I think putting him up against Gunnar is a great way to see if he's for real. So I mean, this fight to me, I've already established George is going nowhere fast. So let's see if Gunnar is able to get past him and kind of move up in the rankings.
I think you're right. And I'm going to pick Santiago to give Gunnar a big setback, and maybe even a vicious setback, the kind that permanently cripples your MMA career momentum because you got your ass whipped so bad you can never get out of your head. That's just a feeling I have. So
you think he's going to be the Icelandic Dan Hardy? Everybody thought he was going to be the next big thing, but in reality,
yeah. I think that it's going to be more like Dave Terrell actually. I think I see something similar happening. Dave Terrell was a little bit of a hyped middweight coming out of the Cesar Gracie camp way back in, say, 2005.
Yeah, that's an old school. You're going to have a lot of people are going to say who, what?
Exactly. That's my mission, to educate people about the history of our great sport. And the great Evan Tanner, of course, elbowed the fuck out of Dave Terrell, and Terrell never really fought again. All right, light heavyweights, Jimmy Manuwa versus Cyril the Snake Diabate. You remember these guys? Oh
yeah, I mean, I love Manuwa. He is. I mean, if you're talking about hype, I'm on this guy. I've got Brock Lesnar levels of hype towards him. I'm super excited for him. He is basically, if we're not going to have if we're not going to have Melvin Meinhof in the UFC, at least we have Jimmy Manuwa. He just cuts through people and hurts them. There are guys who, they're athletes in this sport, and then there are fighters, and then there are like sadistic people who really just, they have they have this ability inside them to just know instinctively in any position how they can throw something to just hurt somebody. And his destruction of who was it? It was Natasha Wick's boyfriend. What was his name again?
Cal Kingsbury.
Yeah, there we go. Cal Kingsbury.
Kingsbury's says a lot. Tough guy, not especially skilled or gifted, but tough.
Oh, he held in throughout that fight. I was very impressed. But afterwards, he had it looked like he had eggs over his eyes. It was bad. Yeah, it was bad. He had Rocky at the end of Rocky 1 level. It was just, it's the kind of thing that you can't take a whole lot of. And so, I mean, I don't even think that Tete-A-Tete really, he's one of those guys who was given a respect shot in the UFC because he's been around for so long. And I don't really think that he belongs there. He's just kind of rattling around in the can until he gets shook out.
4-2 in the UFC though, which is...
he's doing well, but I can't say none of his performances, but you've seen performances from him where it's just lethargic. There's not a lot going along. He's not really showing a lot of skills. He has deficiencies on the ground that are just never going to go away. He's an old dog.
He got submitted by the hippo, Anthony Perosh, so that kind of says a lot.
Yeah, so and I just he's not the kind of fighter who's going to be able to beat Manua because they got to stand. If you're a jiu-jitsu guy and you're fighting a wrestler, then the wrestler can keep it up and standing. But I mean, where do you go when you're Cyril Tete-A-Tete and you're a stand-up fighter against a guy who is a stand-up meat grinder?
Well, he submitted Chad Griggs, so he's got a little.
And that
bit
means
of
so much. That means so much.
It really does.
Chad Griggs, who only had a job because they needed somebody inexperienced enough to fight Herschel Walker.
But he won his bones by beating Bobby Lashley, didn't he? Mm-hmm. He beat Bobby Lashley. Come on, give me some love here. Yeah, I think the other thing is that the Snake Tete-A-Tete is 39 years old. And time is going to catch up with him sooner or later, unless he can get one of those TRT hall passes and then get on that Dan Hendo River of Youth thing. Yeah, I got to go with Manoa here, and I do care about this. This should be a fun one. I think that I don't know what Manoa's ceiling is in the UFC, but I'd like to see it. I'd like to see him get up to the Glover Teixeira level. I don't know that he can make a title shot, but I think he could have some fun fights with some top contenders. So this is what I smell a feature fight here. I think Joe Silva put the aging Cyril Tete-A-Tete in here, knowing that the guy's too tough and too thick-headed to turn down a fight against a killer like Manoa, and is likely to take a spectacular beating for the fans.
Yeah, Manua is going to be a guy who's going to be around at the top, the top-ish level of the light heavyweight division. I don't know if he's ever his ground game is still a little bit iffy. Kingsbury took advantage of that in the minutes that he was able to kind of hold on in the fight. So I think that any of the top guys who are much better than Kingsbury in those areas will be able to take advantage of that. But Manua will be floating around, having exciting fights in the UFC up at the top of the division. I think for the next 5 years.
That's pretty ambitious because the guy's 32 years old. I think he's got more like a 2 or 3 year window, but we'll see. We'll see. All right, featherweights Cub Swanson and Dustin Poirier in the co-main event. Obviously, care, don't care?
Well, both of them are guys that put on exciting fights. I mean, Fight of the Night awards across the two of them, there's quite a few. And Swanson is a guy who, I would never bet on because it seems like he's kind of inconsistent.
He's a heartbreaker.
But it seems like if this is a weird thing to say, but it makes sense in fighting. You'll understand what I mean. If he's got someone in front of him he can beat, he's going to beat them bad.
Yep, and I think he's on a little bit of an uptick. He's got 3 knockouts in a row. He's 3-1 in the UFC since coming over from the WEC, and knocking out George Roop, not so impressive. Knocking out Ross Pearson got my attention, and then knocking out Charles Oliveira, I was very impressed with. And so I think Swanson's on a little bit of a run here that might see him, get a title shot where he'll be killed by Jose Aldo. But Poirier was all hot and had everybody hot and bothered. Then he ran into the Korean Zombie and lost in a great fight, possibly a fight of the year. I think it was declared fight of the year officially by the UFC in 2012. And so no shame in that. Then he came back and beat Jonathan Brookins. Who you like in this fight?
I really don't know. I think if I was going to put money on it, if I was being forced to put $50, I'd put it on Poirier. But just in general, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a good fight. It's a nice, reliable co-main. You don't have to worry about it being 3 rounds of nothing happening and then there being no heat for the headline fight. So it's a good choice in that regard, and it's solid matchmaking, and I dig it like that.
Yeah, I have to go. I mean, this fight to me meets all my criteria. It's a fight that promises to be exciting, and it's a fight that matters because these are two guys in our Bloody Elbow meta rankings. We got Cub Swanson ranked at number 7 and Dustin Poirier at number 9 in the featherweight division. And I think this has not title implications, but title shot implications. I think the winner of this fight is maybe 2 fights away from a title shot. Of course, fighting on Fuel TV is not going to do anything for your career or pay-per-view sales, but it is what it is. And that brings us all the way to the headline of the fight. Everybody is talking about the buzz. I mean, not just fans, but just like my mom was talking about the interim bantamweight title fight coming up because
Are you being sarcastic, or was she really?
Just a touch. No, she has no idea. She vaguely aware of what cage fighting is, but I mean, when she heard that the world's second best 135-pound fighter was going to be determined on Saturday, her ears pricked up. She said, "This is the second best male bantamweight in the world."
Well, it could be worse. We could be forced to watch Dominic Cruz fight.
It's true. I'm not a fan of the point fighter. And so, Dana White, did you catch Dana White kind of encouraging Dominic Cruz to retire yesterday?
Basically kind of saying if he blows out another ACL or MCL, because isn't this the second time that he's lost it, and he's broken his hands a bunch of times as well, hasn't he?
He has.
So he's an injury prone fighter, so I can kind of understand where it comes from there. So maybe he can hasten that decision up by giving him some weird locker room bonuses, a couple $1 million here and there, and just say, sit at the sports desk, you've done your thing. Now that people are paying attention in the sport, you can just be a former champion, one of the first bantamweight champions, and you can sit back there and you can have your legend instead of everybody realizing how boring you are and hating you.
Yep, I have to agree with you. I do find their pushing of Cruz on all their shows kind of inexplicable, although he's not bad on camera. Now, Hanan Barao, though, is somebody I think would have a chance to beat Cruz. I think I'm pretty high on Barao. He's 29-1. He's got a list of who's who in the bantamweight division on his victims list, including Uriah Faber, Scott Jorgensen, Brad Pickett, Cole Escovedo, Chris Carriazo. I mean, he's beaten some guys, and he's done it with the combination. He's won more fights by submission, not a lot of knockouts on his resume, but he's got some, and he's got good kickboxing. What do you think? You think he can beat Michael McDonald?
I like Michael McDonald more just because if it's a 5-round fight between a guy who when you're up at the elite levels, doesn't finish like Barao. Barao will finish your middling contenders and with a submission, but when you're up against the cream of the crop, he goes to a decision. While Michael McDonald is another buzzsaw, and if you've got a 5-round fight, I like Michael McDonald because Barao has been talking a lot about maybe moving up to 145 because he's bigger than Jose Aldo. And, he doesn't like the cut. So I'm expecting him to, if it makes it to the 3rd round, because Michael McDonald is a 1st-round blitzer, then I think that it just continues to favor McDonald more and more. And McDonald isn't the kind of guy who's going to stand in front of Barao for 5 rounds and just trade combinations. So I'm really hot on Michael McDonald.
I am too. He's a 22-year-old, which, the younger they are and fighting at this level, he's 15-1 already. I think the guy's got a bright future, and I'd love to see him, take it all the way because he brings mega violence, which is pretty rare at these lower weight classes. He beat the crap out of Miguel Torres last year, kicked Torres right out of the UFC, knocked out Alex Soto, took a split decision against Chris Carriazo at UFC 130 in a fight I have no recollection of, but it can't have been that great. Beat Edwin Figueroa by unanimous decision. I like McDonald. I don't know. This is another good fight. I mean, I like both these guys. They're both very formidable, and I really have no idea what's going to happen. So I'm excited to see that. So I got to give this a care. I also think it's cool that they're giving the British fans a title fight, even if it is the much maligned UFC interim bantamweight title. But it's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, the UK fans have been complaining a lot, so it's nice that they're kind of being thrown a bone. And to a certain degree, I think that, a lot of this discussion about the interim belt and stuff, I think if it wasn't for all this talk about how these lower weight belts aren't being given as much credence as the others, it's a good thing because it slowed down the UFC's decision to bring in the strawweights.
Yeah.
yeah, I think they've really realized that they have to slow down and develop these divisions more and sort it out. In the meantime, they can use these lower weight belts to fill up some of these smaller cards in different international areas. So I think it works out for everybody because the UK fans appreciate it and they're going to get a good fight. This is a good fight, and yeah.
You know, I think they could even use stuff like this on the Fox card. I was really skeptical of the idea of having that flyweight title fight on Fox, but I felt like Mighty Mouse and John Dotson totally delivered, and the ratings showed. The fans stuck with him, throughout the fight and grew as the fight went on. So I'm kind of a believer as long as they keep the shit shows like Dominic Cruz off of broadcast television. Like Cruz is just dreadfully tedious to watch, and so keep him away from broadcast TV. We only have a couple minutes left, but let's just talk about one little thing I wanted to get your take on. The Bellator reality show Fight Master with the coaches Joe Warren. Nobody cares. He's a Bellator guy. A pretty good competitor, but it's already seen his day. But the other three coaches are pretty interesting. It's like a Dana White's anti-Valentine's Day list. Frank Shamrock, who's hated Dana White, and it's been reciprocated for a decade now. Greg Jackson, the man Dana White called a sport killer when he advised John Jones to refuse to take a fight against Chael Sonnen, necessitating the cancellation of UFC 151. And Randy Couture, Dana White's ex. Dana says Randy's a man in the cage, but nowhere else. What do you think about this? Is this karma coming back to get Dana White?
Well, we see this every time a legitimate competitor comes along. They end up scooping up all the dissatisfied people who have a bone to pick with Dana White or who aren't in Dana White's wheelhouse. I mean, Randy Couture was very clear saying like him and his lawyer were working very hard to try and convince the UFC to give him an offer that would allow him to stay with the UFC. I mean, his Fox contract was a bit of a joke. I mean, he was getting less airtime than Kurt Menefee, and considering less airtime than Dominic Cruz. It's very clear that Dana White never really let him back into the circle after that whole affliction thing, and that's kind of how the UFC works. Is they'll bury the hatchet, but they won't forget where it is, and so every single time a new competitor comes along, there's always going to be these guys that go over, but they were never guys that were really like UFC, teammates. So I don't know what Greg Jackson is thinking though, because he's got to understand it's a dangerous game to play when you throw in with an organization the way that he did. I mean, we've seen agents. I think Ken Pavio was one, and there was Monty Cox was another. These guys were used to be top agents in the sports, and they barely have any relevance anymore because they sided with a promotion that went to war with the UFC. And I mean, Bellator's not going to win. I mean, Fight Master. The reason it's called Fight Master is because Spike has another show on called Ink Masters, which is a tattoo reality show. And if you're wondering like whether or not their Fight Master is going to be some well-produced, amazing show, Fight Master is being done by the same people as Ink Master. They can say, "Oh, this is the people that did The Amazing Race" or whatever reality show they're touting it as that says they're going to be on this like nth level of quality. It's the same crews that work on Ink Master. They're going to work on Fight Master, and it's not terrible, but it's Spike quality.
Yep.
So I'm not expecting anything amazing. Honestly, I'm expecting your standard North American. They're going to spoon feed you all the drama that's going on with stupid music cues and like camera close up, and it's going to be your average Mansour style Spike television show.
I can't argue with you there, but I think the thing about Bellator is that they don't have to win. They're going to survive because of the Spike relationship. They're showing that they can pull anywhere from 750,000 to over 1 million viewers, not over 1 million, but close to 1 million viewers on Spike. And that's a serious thing. That's a big audience. They're going to be there. They're not going to be doing spectacular things, but they're already fighting for Eddie Alvarez, somebody that UFC wanted, not a lot, but wanted pretty decent amount. I think the UFC was pretty confident they were going to get Eddie Alvarez and Bellator wouldn't be able to match. And so they were kind of surprised when Bellator pulled the stunt of taking the contract the UFC offered Alvarez, marking out UFC and replacing it with Bellator, which was chicken shit in a way. But, the long game, I want to get your take on this, is I think they're trying to establish that the UFC's various locker room bonuses and pay-per-view percentages do not constitute guaranteed money, and that's really a bigger deal than Eddie Alvarez. This is an attack on the entire contract structure of the UFC. So, I don't know. I think it's an interesting fight, and I think Bellator's a for real opponent. But honestly, I gotta agree. Frank Shamrock has been in the ankle biter category with Dana White. He's been a big part of Strikeforce, which was a big enough of a threat for the UFC to have to buy, but never a threat to dominate against the UFC. Randy Couture, I got to go with Dana on this one. I'm a huge fan of Randy in the cage and a huge fan of his announcing, but this is a guy who's been married, 3, 4 times? And I know of 5 different business partners that he's ended on bad terms. You got the UFC twice. You've got Matt Lindland. You've got the late Sean Tompkins that was his partner at Extreme Couture. You got Dan Henderson. A lot of guys with bad feelings toward Randy Couture. A lot of ladies with bad feelings toward Randy Couture. You know, the kind of guy you walk away from feeling a little burned after he shakes your hand and walks away. So I can't blame Dana for being pissed, and I don't know. We'll see. I don't think it's going to amount to that much. But as far as Greg Jackson, though, don't you think that Dana kind of pushed him there? I mean, after Dana's called you a sport killer and publicly eviscerated you, you got to know there's no love.
Yeah, well, I mean, he does it for a reason. Like the nuclear option on Randy Couture was done specifically to show everybody what happens if where you stand if you're going to go over to Bellator right now. And there's when it's kind of like when AKA when John Fitch wouldn't sign the video game deals and Dana White cut the entire camp. These are messages that he sends in order to keep everybody else in line. In a way, he's a bully like that. And you really get to see, the UFC's hardball face, and honestly, we haven't seen that in 5 years, and a lot of people are now gonna get a rude awakening. It seems like they're trying to play. Dana White wants to play the good guy in all of this, and Bellator gave him a really great angle to work that with the Eddie Alvarez situation. So it seems like they're trying to play it clean, like they're releasing Chris Cyborg, which I think is insane. Chris Cyborg is one of the few potential superstars that you don't want to let out.
You really think so? I mean, she certainly performed at a superstar level against Gina Carano in terms of fan interest in the fight, but following that,
she's a real life China. She's a real life China. China was one of the key, not to get all rustling, and it's not like I know all that much about it. No. But she was one of the key features in that whole WWE Attitude Era where, and Chris Cyborg is a real life China. She goes out, she kicks ass, she's jacked to the gills, and a lot of people are asking where she's going to go and what kind of big fights she's going to have. And trust me when I say this. The Bellator is going to bring her in and put her up against Holly Holm. They're going to put her up against other weird European kickboxers who are just as jacked and weird, and it's going to be really good for their bottom line and for their viewership. And they're going to turn her into a star to rival Ronda Rousey, who's going to cut through everybody so badly that people are going to think that she's a paper champion.
That's an interesting take on it. Dave Meltzer said that Tito Ortiz, who's Cyborg's manager's decision to ask for his release from the UFC was, I believe, spectacularly bad business advice was the term that Meltzer used. So, and I'm with him. I mean, when was the last time Bellator did a 145 pound match to any degree? I mean, how often is Holly Holm fighting over there?
But if you've got a fighter like Chris Cyborg, all you have to do is book her. You can book her every 3 months against whatever random person. You're not going to put her in a tournament. Maybe they will do a 145 pound tournament, but I would be amazed. But they're going to book her. And the other option was fighting in Invicta, which I don't care what your internet stream numbers are. That's not mainstream. That's not television. You're not going to get very far on that.
And also the Invicta and the UFC clearly have some sort of deal. The UFC is letting female fighters go fight in Invicta when they don't have space for them on the cards. I believe, is it Miesha Tate maybe? Sarah Kaufman?
A whole bunch. There's you've already seen. I mean, Kat Zingano was an Invicta fighter. There's a full on deal between the two of them, and Dana White was very clear on the fact that he was perfectly happy sending Chris Cyborg over to Invicta to fight until the 135-pound bantamweight title for women was established, which makes sense. He wanted everything to line up perfectly. And this is, I think, a bit of a problem with the UFC, where they really where it's either their way or the highway, and they weren't willing to compromise to make this super fight happen. And it's ridiculous because we need evidence that they can do what they need to do to make the super fights happen, not just claim that Frankie Edgar versus Jose Aldo is a super fight, not just claim that Anthony Pettis versus Jose Aldo is a super fight. The real super fights are already established in fans' minds. You can't create them out of hype and nothing. And this is one of them, and they are literally letting Chris Cyborg walk away. And I don't know if she's going to come back. I think she could be if Bellator gets any traction whatsoever, which is doubtful because of the way that they're running everything.
So you're not impressed with their ratings?
It's not so much their ratings, it's their decisions and kind of what they're doing. What happens to fighters after they lose in the tournaments? We've seen a couple of really exciting guys come through the Bellator tournament, lose, and end up in what I like to call the Bellator Twilight Zone, where you've lost in your tournament, and what happens to you then? Maybe you get a fight on an undercard 9 months from now. What happens to you? So that's a real downside they have to figure out fast. And beyond that, the main reason that I think that they're not going to last long isn't so much because their ratings are bad, but because they're spending too much money. The amount of money that they would have had to offer Randy Couture across all of those platforms was probably in the millions of dollars.
But that's Spike money. That's not Bellator money.
Sure, but these people are going to be looking at the bottom line, and they're going to if Bellator continues to lose money because if they want to compete with the UFC, they're going to have to spend some money. I think
they're losing money at those kind of ratings, though. 800, 900,000, that's pretty good for Spike TV. And Spike is a channel that was built around the UFC, so they're desperate to replace that MMA content. TNA has basically been a failure as a wrestling promotion. They've never put on a pay-per-view, or not a successful pay-per-view, but they've been a pretty good ratings deliverer for Spike, and Spike is happy with them. Spike makes money on TNA, and I think Spike's going to make money on Bellator and keep it around. I don't think they're going to achieve the heights that the UFC's achieved in cultural impact or on pay-per-view, but I think they're going to be on Spike and be on Spike for a while. I don't think Viacom is looking to make a quick buck. I think Viacom's playing a long game with Bellator, but
I hope they do, because I see. In some ways, there are signs that once everything gets going, because this deal has just begun, and as we get into it, I think it's going to be kind of like what you saw with Strikeforce, where they start to see that things are going okay, and then they decide, okay, well, why not pay for Fedor? Why not pay for all these heavyweight fighters? And all of a sudden, they're going to find themselves drowning in red ink for either ratings that are not stabilizing, because you're still building around a tournament format that either will or won't work. So it's questionable, and I'd like there to be a second league out there. I just don't know whether or not Bjorn Rebney is really in control of the ship anymore, and I don't trust the guys that really have final say.
I got to disagree with you there. I think that the guys at Spike were a big part of building the UFC, and I think that their hand on the till is going to be a little steadier than the guys at Showtime. I think that the downfall of Strikeforce was the involvement of CBS, because CBS liked the Kimbo ratings that they got and the Gina Carano ratings, and they wanted to recreate that. And after Elite XC collapsed in a heap when Kimbo lost to Seth Petrozelli, they were really wanting to get those big numbers, and they were watching. That was during the peak of the UFC's run on Spike, and they were seeing what the UFC was doing with fights like Rampage Jackson versus Dan Henderson and Tito Ortiz versus Ken Shamrock. Were getting amazing ratings, and CBS wanted a slice of that and pressured Strikeforce. By all accounts of the people I've talked to, they were really the drivers of the Fedor signing, and that was the once the ink was dry on that, Strikeforce was doomed. That was the proverbial deal with the devil that killed Strikeforce, and I think CBS was the guys behind it. I don't see a CBS. Viacom is parent company of both CBS and Spike, but it's split. There's two different pieces of the company. There's no talk of MMA on CBS anymore. I don't think there's that kind of pressure. I think they're just there to deliver solid, if not spectacular, cable TV ratings, and it'll be slow and steady for several years to come. That's my pick.
Oh, I hope you're correct, because there needs to be a secondary league.
I'd bet my eyebrows on it, Ryan. All right. Well, this has been MMA Nation on YouTube. Thanks a lot for Ryan joining us. We'll hopefully have you back again soon. Where can fans follow your work?
Fightlinker.com is pretty much the main thing. So that's where I spend most of my time spewing obscenity and stupid opinions. So check that out. And
you got a Twitter?
At Fightlinker. And we got a Tumblr as well, fightlinker.tumblr.com, where we put stupid stuff up. And a lot of that's end up on our Fightlinker Facebook page, too. So Fightlinker, Fightlinker, Fightlinker.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Ryan. And we'll be posting this tomorrow on Friday. And is that some black pussy on the screen?
Yeah, he's angry that I'm not paying attention to him.
I know how that goes. All right, Ryan, thanks a lot. And remember to subscribe to MMA Nation and follow all our YouTube casts.